Please, what would alleviate the problem and remove the need for a food bank?
That's a really good question, because when I'm asked, how do you know if the food bank's being successful, my answer will be, when we shut the door because we don't need it. That's a successful food bank. There is no one answer because there's no one problem. And I keep explaining this to politicians who say, oh, they're going to drill down and get the answer. You can't. The problems that we're presented with are complex and they're multifaceted. So you can't say one thing. I do know, however, that when I talk to business people and politicians, I get asked sometimes, if we had a magic wand, if we could make a difference, what could we do for you? And I think they're often expecting me to say, oh, give me some food or give me some money or pay the rent. But in actual fact, my answers tends to be the same. We have a lot of situations that we witness, and Dylan's probably seen it as well, where people will say, Mr. I'm supposed to be in the hospital this week. I've got a CAT scan or a CT scan lined up, or I'm doing an MRI, or I've just got a straightforward outpatient appointment. But I'm not going. And with my health background, obviously, I'm saying, no, this is important, and it's an opportunity for you, and you need to go. And they'll say, I don't have that bus money. And it's really hard for people to comprehend that there are people in this island who cannot put their hand in their pocket or their purse and pull out enough to get to hospital. And if I had my way, if government were simply to say, do you know what, Neal? Here's a book of travel warrants, and you can authorise it for a day. We're not talking about people going on a week's adventure around the island for a day to get them from point A to essential point B. So to get to the hospital, to get into Markwell House, it's going to cost nearly £6 to go from Ramsey into Douglas. It'll cost nearly £9 to go from Port Erin into Douglas. But we know that there are empty buses going across the island every day. Well, why not sit these people on the bus and get them into that essential meeting?
So almost part of like a sort of patient transfer, but locally.
Yes, but this could be done without a cost. Often the response is, oh, we can't afford that, we'll lose money. No, you're not. The bus is running regardless. The seat's empty regardless. Let these people get on and get to what they need to do.
Dylan, I suppose living on an island, perhaps we take geographical mobility for granted a little bit.
Sure.
Again, the perception nothing's very far away, but it probably does provide a barrier for people if they aren't able to afford that.
Yeah, I was just thinking through what Neal was saying, and I'm trying to think what some of the listeners are probably contemplating on, saying, well, how come I can't get a free bus pass if I need a hospital appointment, or how come I can't get paid to go from A to B? Why do they get privilege, sort of a privileged position to do that? But the way I think about it is that if we put ourselves in other people's shoes and think that actually when the time comes, and it's not if it happens, probably when it happens, when we hit a crisis situation, there will probably be a time when ourselves or somebody who's close to us, a loved one, will go through a difficult time and they will need a bit of help. So yeah, it's thinking about it in that context, that actually for that season, for that short period, they may need a bus voucher just to get to the food bank or get to their healthcare appointments or whatever appointments it is, just to help them, help themselves, so to speak. I'm also thinking of the chaotic nature of people, that some people are really well organized, yes, and they have a lot of friends and family who can help them out, but some people have maybe burnt all their bridges, or they don't have a lot of people or neighbors to help them out, and they need a bit of extra help. And I think we'll be a good neighbor if we can support them in similar fashion to what Neal said.
So I think that's one of the best descriptions. We all work with people with very chaotic lifestyles.
So does that become like almost a means testing issue then, if you have to try and judge clients, if that's the right word, on a sort of case by case basis?
Certainly from our point of view we do, because we do that exercise at the first interview to say what's coming in, what's going out. I might sit with, in one day I could sit with a mum with perhaps 3 or 4 children and see that at the end of that exercise, pardon me, she's working with perhaps £40 or £50 a week for food shopping and other essential needs. I can sit with somebody else who comes in and says, I really need help. And we'll go through it, and we might find they could have anywhere from £100 to £150 a week. But they perceive it that they've got a real serious problem, and they'll say, but I don't have that much money, and I'm always borrowing, and I'm doing this. And that's when we have to sit down and tease out, where's that money actually going? And for some people, it's the first time they've had to really challenge themselves and account for how they're spending their money. And then we begin to see issues, and I'm seeing more of it since last September, where I'm working mainly with women where they're saying, I'm not able to cope, I'm in crisis. But when we look at the money, there's more than they've anticipated. And they said, I'm not seeing it laid out like that. I didn't realise that. But then where's it going, and why do I feel like this? And I think a lot of what I've been seeing since September is anxiety about the future. Not that I can't cope today, but I don't think I'm going to cope at Christmas. I don't think I'm going to cope going into the new school year, that sort of problem.
We were talking a bit, Neil, you and I, before the 1 o'clock news about some of the scepticism perhaps about the food bank services. I'm sure the same probably applies to the Salvation Army. We've had one message in, Aaron, an example of that maybe.
Yeah, perhaps dispel a myth for us, Neil. I was told by one of the volunteers that a great deal of those who use the food banks are from Eastern Europe. Is this correct, and why? So I suppose if you could, allude to the demographic that you're sort of dealing with, Neil.
Yeah. Again, something that I hear a lot, and people telling me, we know this to be true. In actual fact, our figures over the last 9 months since we moved up to Ballafletcher show that we still continue to have the majority of clients are Manx, so 55% Manx. The rest are going to be made up of British Irish Scots. And after that, we've got something like 2 or 3% European and non-European. It's really small. People who come from here, from around Europe and outside of Europe, come here because they've got a job lined up, they've got a work permit, they've got a great work ethic, and they come over and they stick to it and they contribute to the island. And that's great. And they get into the community, they become islanders. They're never going to be Manx, but they can be islanders. It's only when something goes wrong with the company and you wake up one day and suddenly they're told the company's gone bust, there's no compensation, we've no redundancy for you. They can't sign on to benefits because they haven't been here for 5 years. They can't apply for social housing, they haven't been here for 10 years. So they're really stuck and they're entitled to nothing. And they have to make a decision. Do we go back home and be left home for a reason, to have a better future? Or do we try and survive on the island with zero benefit and hope we can get jobs quickly, etc.? And that becomes a real problem for themselves, the other agencies on the island, and for the food bank. We're happy to help for short periods of crises. What we're not here for is to support somebody for the next 5 years until their benefit kicks in. So another ethical dilemma.
There's some nodding from you, Dylan. Would you sort of share those views?
Yeah, so again, coming from a Salvation Army, we're not here to stereotype or stigmatize anybody. I think we've got to be fair and just. And, the way we look at people is they are people. And regardless of where they come from or where they're native from, we are all part of one human family, really, a big family tree. I'm quite interested to hear the stats, that those attending the food bank, that's, 55% Manx?
Yes.
And then there's a variety, then upwards. But yeah, my experience is that, we've got to be careful to start pointing fingers to say, people are coming in just because of the perks perhaps or the benefits. And yes, we do have to be careful and be accountable. But yeah, we must be careful not to point the finger because there's always 3 pointing back.
Another comment in, I'm not sure if Aaron will have seen it yet, but it's an anonymous text, but it says some people spend their benefits on drink and drugs and go to the food bank for food. This gentleman or lady also says, I also know people who go to the food bank and sell the items they get on eBay. Neal, maybe one for you. Is there any evidence of that? Maybe.
Yeah, again, something that we hear but we don't have evidence for. If somebody comes to us with a drink problem or a drug-related problem, that's not a reason not to support them. We do say no to people in terms of coming on to the food bank, and sometimes during a period of support, if we become aware that somebody's abusing what we're doing, then we would look at a termination. So, for example, if somebody arrives to pick up their first food parcel and they arrive in a taxi, then our view would be, well, if you've got the money to spend in a taxi, you do not need help from the food bank. If somebody sat at that interview and I'm saying, you've got £100 a month, £100 a week to survive on, you don't need support from the food bank. You might need help, and that's where we'll signpost to other agencies, including mental health and stuff like that, or sometimes just sitting talking it through with them and making them aware of where that anxiety is coming from. And that's all part of the good management stuff, being able to manage a budget, etc. So we can still help, but it won't be directly from us. We've been told for the last 5 years, yeah, people sell goods on. We've never, ever had it witnessed